Hello, rock stars, and welcome back to our Star Island quilt along. My name is Holly, a Knight of String and Story, and it's my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. Now, I'm gonna tweak where there we are. I've got, as always, live on Instagram, live on YouTube. I'm gonna be going back and forth as we're chit chatting, but I'm so excited tonight because we're gonna talk through a little bit about what quilting plans are and why they matter, which many of y'all have heard me speak on before. But then I'm also gonna show you a few different drawings or quilt ups for Star Island. And then also talk about some other ideas, right? We've talked in many contexts about how I tend to be a more is more quilter. So you're going to see that in some of these quilting plans that I show you this evening. And so before we even get started, I want to put like a big giant asterisk and remind you that you don't have to be a more is more quilter. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this evening. Okay. Now, the whole idea of a quilting plan is that it's a little bit like planning a road trip, right? You're figuring out your destination so you can know the best way to get there. Hello, Jimsy. We have arrived at the age where apparently Hubster and my kiddo are watching my live. Here we are. Jim, did you just have to come back for the next installment because you were with me in person last week and you had to know what was next? That's my curiosity. So hello, Kate Brennan. I'm so excited to see you tomorrow. Oh my gosh, this is big fun. So here's the deal. When you are planning your quilting plan and you are figuring out what you're going to quilt where, right? One of the first things that I want us to think about is what is going to be the job of your quilt. Now, I always put the same caveat on this part, right? That even though most of my quilts are going to end up with Jimsy and Ian turning into blanket forts in my living room or on the green out in front of our house or doing who knows what, right? I still love to do a lot of more is more quilting because that's just my jam, right? But for most folks, if a quilt is going to get lots and lots of use, you may want something a little simpler. If you're going to submit this to a show, whether that be at your guild, whether that be QuiltCon, it could be Quilt Festival or Paducah, right? Then you're probably going to want to do something a little bit more. Now, I see some other fun friends have joined us. Hello, Susan and Jen, Alyssa, Terry. It is so good to see y'all. And I generally say that there are three types of quilting plans, right? Quilting plan number one uses one motif. It's an all over design. Think of your classic meander, right? It is one motif. It is all over the whole quilt. And that's, the most straightforward type of quilting plan. You make one decision and then you execute. Okay. If you are new to finishing your own quilts, it is very normal to spend a lot of time in that space, right? Of you're practicing different motifs, you're going to just pick one, and you're going to do it all over the whole quilt. Okay. The second type of quilting plan uses 2 to 3 motifs. So for this, I often use the example of what I kind of think of as the typical quilt, right? Which we live in a time of extremely creative quilting. So this is a gross oversimplification to describe a typical quilt. But picture with me a quilt that has blocks, it has sashings, and then it has a border, right? So there are 3 main parts of this quilt. Hello, Helen at your guild retreat, and hello to Helen's Guild. Now, if we're doing a semi-custom quilting plan or a type 2 quilting plan, we might put one motif in the blocks, another in the sashing, another in the border, right? My go-to in this situation is a meander in the block, some wishbones in the sashings, and then some switchbacks or some feathers in the border. Right? It's pretty straightforward. You can plan how to move from point A to point B without having to do a lot of thread breaks. And it gives you a really nice finished appearance, right? Then there's a quilting plan like what's going on behind me, which I have another sample of that same quilting plan that I can hold up so y'all can see it a little bit closer. But there's just a lot going on. There's ruler quilting. There's free motion quilting. There's a bunch of different free motion quilting motifs. There's multiple ruler motifs happening. It is the more is more option. Okay. Now, when I look at a quilt like Star Island, because I tend to be a more is more quilter, that's where my brain immediately goes. But let's go through and let's go through in order and talk through what it might look like. And in fact, you know what, y'all? I'm going to do a fun thing that I've never actually done before. I'm going to draw on a picture of Star Island in real time. Let me see how my battery is doing on my iPad for this. We are slowly getting there. Let me grab my Apple Pencil. Y'all never know what's going to happen when I decide to go live, right? Like something's always up, right? So if you were to put an all over motif on Star Island, if maybe you're thinking about this, right? What are some motifs that already come to mind for you, right? We already talked about the meander. I'm going to do some doodling off to the side here because I have a picture of a 16 block Star Island. So I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to divide it into quadrants. I'm going to make my pencil a little bit thicker. Wow, that was a terrible sound from my throat. I'm so desperately sorry about that. So y'all can see what I'm doing. Now keep in mind, no, that's too thick, that when you quilt this, your thread is going to be very, very fine, right? So that's always something to keep in mind when you're doodling for your quilting plans. And I always make my quilting plans either on screen, like what I'm doing here with my iPad, or on paper, right? I'll print out a picture of the quilt and make all of these decisions drawn out before I start quilting because I want to be able to see them before I get started. Okay, I'm doing just a couple of common motifs over here, and then I'll show you all at once. I'm using a really thick line to draw these, but keep in mind that your thread would be very, very fine and would not overpower the quilt quite the way that this is threatening to do, okay? But I want y'all to be able to see it on a screen, through a screen, which is a whole challenge. But we draw this out on paper because one part of our brain makes decisions, right? That is usually the left side of your brain is going to be your more kind of cerebral cortex-y, making all of those technical choices part of our brain. And then the other part of our brain, our right brain, is much more creative, right? And when we access that right side of our brain, that's where we're able to access flow. That's where we're able to just go through the motions. We lose track of time, all of those beautiful, good things, right? Now, if you are a new quilter, and by quilter in this context, I mean new to finishing your own quilts, right? Maybe you've just gone through my Free Motion Quilting Academy or Ruler Quilting Academy. Maybe you're aspiring to do that here in, our next cohort that enrolls in a couple of weeks. But if you're new to finishing your own quilts, you may not feel a lot of flow yet, right? It might still take a lot of mental energy just to sit down and be quilting these motifs on your machine. The flow part will come, right? But even so, if our brain is full of having to remember, I need to sit up, I need to drop my shoulders, I need to have good posture. Let me make sure that my tension looks good. Oh, I need to reposition my hands. We've got all these things going through in our brains, right? The last thing we need to be doing is try to remember what the quilting plan was. That's why we draw it out first, so we can focus on the quilting separately from the decision making, okay? Let's see, I have a meander, I have swirls. What's another motif that I should pick? Someone shout one out for me. I'm putting y'all on the spot now. You have to type. I just thought of another one that I will draw while I wait for one of y'all to be brave and give me a motif. And keep in mind, I am showing 4 different options on one picture of the quilt, but we're treating all of these as all over motifs, right? So we would do just one of these motifs all over the whole quilt. Let's see, did anybody? A feather, excellent. So I'm doing a paisley at the moment, and then I will do a feather. Which, y'all, if you don't know do y'all know the secret of feathers? Feathers have a secret. They're just paisleys that lined up for recess. That's all they are. Kindergarten teacher got out that little rope with the handles and said, everybody grab a handle and walk out to recess with me. And all the paisleys got in line, and therefore we have a feather. I kid you not. It's that straightforward. That's why when you go through FMQA, I teach you paisleys pretty early on. And then by the time we get to feathers, you're like, wait a second, that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. All right, I'm going to make this bigger and make my line a little smaller. Someday I'll have really fancy technology and y'all will be able to watch me draw this in real time. I'm not quite there yet with our current setup, but someday. Again, I'm doing this very large. I would do this much smaller on the quilt for real. But it starts to give us an idea, right? And sometimes like that start of an idea is all we really need. The other secret with feathers is to really smush them in like sardines, right? Think about when you watch those little kindergartners walk down the hall holding onto the handle with all the loops, right? And they're all kind of half tripping over each other and bumping into each other because those handles are not very far apart and they're not very good at body awareness yet, right? The analogy holds up to the bitter end. It's wild. Okay. First up, again, remember, I have drawn these bold and large for the sake of visualization. I'm going to hold them over here for YouTube first. First up, we have the meander. This is a simple wiggly line. You could absolutely do a simple wiggly line all over your Star Island. And for some of you, like me, you've picked really bold fabric choices, right? This is mocked up on my very bold choices. Oops. I just made a random line all the way across my drawing. Very bold choices from Oh Lucky Lucky. So something real simple and straightforward like that would absolutely be a great move. Next up, we could do some swirls, right? These would add, there's a lot of points in here, right? This is a really pokey quilt. Not quite as pokey as a design that I'm playing around with that Leslie told me looks like one of those long-legged centipedes, so clearly the design needs some work. She was not wrong, for the record. Like, that was fair feedback. You know, this isn't quite as pokey as that, but it's a pretty pokey quilt. And doing something really organic, like swirls or maybe even like paisleys, could add a lot of really lovely texture right there on the quilt without, you know, and kind of soften some of those edges a little bit. Notice I have a teal line that I'm doodling with. I am hoping to quilt this with a teal thread. And then finally, we have the idea of paisleys, right? And you can see that too would have a softening effect on this quilt with lots and lots of texture. If I was not planning to custom quilt mine, shameless plug, the Star Island Custom Quilting Masterclass is coming up in 9 days, so a week from Wednesday. I will show y'all my quilting plan as part of this evening. And y'all are going to get to watch me quilt that in real time and break down my whole planning process for you, like for real, during that the Custom Quilting Masterclass. If you've not signed up for that yet, get your tickets and join me. But if I was not planning to custom quilt my Star Island, this feather would look really, really beautiful, right? It would add a lot, I think, to the movement of this, especially because I chose to use that adorable little nope rope print with all the colorful snakes for my background on mine. I think it would echo that shape really well. One of my favorite things with quilting plans is to pull shapes out of the quilt or out of the fabric and incorporate it into the quilting plan. And I think those feathers would be a really good option for that. And if you are in the process of learning feathers, doing a feather meander all over would give you really good practice. Awesome. Great job, everyone. Let's talk about a semi-custom quilting plan, right? So a semi-custom quilting plan might pick, say, one motif for the center of the block here, another motif for these stars, and then a third one for our background, all right? I'm going to draw one of these really quick because I want to do a slightly finer line for this so y'all get a little bit of a better idea of what this might look like. And I already know what I want to drop in my little lanterns. Zoop, zoop, zoop. You know, and giving some consideration to what I was just saying, that this is a very angular quilt. And so it's worth considering, do you want to soften some of those edges with the motifs that you choose? Okay. So I know what I want to do in there. I know what I want to do back here. So I'm putting some little like telephone cord loops in those lanterns because I think that's a really fun way to accent points. What will not be immediately obvious on this drawing is I would probably stitch in the ditch all the way around and then again here, right? If I'm going to do this, I'm going to want those edges to stay crispy because I'm picking motifs specifically to emphasize this shape and then this shape. So stitching in the ditch is going to add a lot of definition to that. And because I think we could probably do this quilting plan without breaking thread, it shouldn't be too difficult to add that step in, which I will talk y'all through that for this in just a second. Let me decide what I want to do in the middle here. I think I want swirls. Y'all, I have a confession. I have been free motion quilting. I was actually talking about this at the lovely Hall County Quilt Guild this morning. I was up there giving an aura philosophy lecture / trunk show. And I have been free motion quilting for almost 10 years, which first of all is wild. Where has the time gone? But I started quilting, shortly after Jim was born, and Jim is now 10 and a half. So here we are. But I've been free motion quilting for almost 10 years. That means I've been teaching free motion quilting for about 8 years, which is a long time. I've taught many of y'all and I hope to teach many more of you in the future. But something that I find terribly annoying is swirls are one of my favorite motifs to quilt. And I actually consider myself quite good at them. Like when I quilt swirls, they look nice, right? But my drawings of them are upsetting. So when I hold this up and they're all kinds of wonky do, just let that remind you, I run into this a lot when I am teaching Free Motion Quilting Academy. We'll be working on a motif and I'll have a student reach out and say, I don't know what to do. I'm working on such and such motif, early on in the course. And no matter how many times I draw it, I hate how it looks. And I'm convinced I'm stuck. This is the end of my free motion quilting journey before it has even begun. And basically every single time I encourage them, quit doodling for a second and go quilt it. And I tell them about my swirls because how my swirls look when I stitch them and how my swirls look when I draw them, there's a really big difference. And I've never quite figured out what it is, but just know that sometimes quilting and drawing are two different animals. Okay. So here in this case, we have put a simple meander in the background. I put swirls in the center and those cute little telephone loops in the triangles. Now I'm still drawing with that same turquoise that I'm probably going to use for my quilting plan. If I were to actually stitch this out, I would stitch it with that citron color. Because I would want to add a little extra sparkle into the center of the quilt. And I would want the quilting to blend a little more here because it would make these stand out more. For them to be solid lime would just wonk, right? So I would actually change my thread color a little bit if I were to do it this way. But these are all very softening designs. And I think it would really give that idea of a glowing lantern, which is part of this picture here, right? We've got a compass inside a lantern kind of design going. And I love to play up shapes like that when I'm picking out my quilting motifs, okay? By the way, at any point that I am sharing thoughts on this, please jump in if you have thoughts, if you have questions, if you want to see how something looks, let me know. So those are our first two types of quilting plan, right? An all-over design, a semi-custom quilting design. This one, I picked 3 motifs. And so far, we've been very much playing within the designs of the quilt. Now let me give you a little sneak peek at what I'm actually going to do on my quilt. Now, this is a combination of emphasizing the quilt piecing, emphasizing the shapes that exist within Star Island, and adding a little extra pizzazz. And one of the things I really wanted to think about with this was incorporating free motion quilting and ruler work. And I wanted to not just incorporate straight line ruler quilting, though there is some of that, but there is a beautiful little half hexie on my new ruler. And I wanted to put that design on a quilt with the new ruler and show you how to do it. I also wanted to incorporate free motion quilting. So for my students that are coming out of FMQA and RQA, I wanted to have a quilting plan that not only told the story of this quilt, but really gave y'all an opportunity to show off. Now, I mentioned the big asterisk at the top of our time together that I am a more is more quilter. So you can assume that the quilting plan I'm about to show you is a little bit extra, okay? The other thing that I want to mention about quilting plans is if I draw a quilting plan, like while we're talking like this, or I put a quilting plan on my blog, you are free to straight up copy it, okay? There are things that are, things like pattern directions and pattern math that are copyrighted, and, that it is a good and proper thing to buy your patterns from designers. But if I put this up on my blog and it's a quilting plan for a quilt, please feel free to copy it. I know that this decision-making process is sometimes the hardest part, especially if you're putting in the work to build your toolbox of free motion quilting and ruler quilting motifs, and you're trying to figure out how to synthesize those things into a finished product, right? That's part of why I love publishing so many quilting plans, because I love to geek out on this process. And my hope is that it inspires you and makes your life a little bit easier, okay? So if you see this and it strikes your fancy and you want to know how it's going to be done, jump into the custom quilting masterclass next week, because I'm going to show you step by step by step. All right. So here she is. I am emphasizing that center lantern in a big old way. I'm trying to hold this so that the screen does not glare. So you can see I've created ruler quilted sections through the center there. Those of you who have taken RQA, you'll recognize that kind of faceted diamond shape that we do in the course, but then I filled it with different motifs. All right. I used some more dot to dot quilting to echo in the lantern shapes. I dropped that hexagon in the center for funsies. And then I did a simple meander in the background because, frankly, the little snake fabric, there's enough going on back there. There's enough going on back there. We don't need any more quilting. So this incorporates a variety of skills from, switchbacks, which I teach in Unit 1 of FMQA, straight line quilting, which I teach in Unit 1 of Ruler Quilting Academy, all the way to hexagons and feathers and things that are much later in the courses. Because I want you, if you've been working on building these skills, to have the possibility of really being able to use them all. Kelly says, I love that. Thanks. I'm really proud of it. And I'm very excited to quilt it. This was, those of you who attended the Polaris Masterclass back in January, I talked extensively at the beginning of it was difficult for me to come up with a new quilting plan for Polaris because I've made and custom quilted several and I've done several things. And I was like, how do I think outside the box? I felt very similarly about Star Island. I have made and quilted several different ones. And the quilting plan on this one behind me, I've actually done this quilting plan on it several times. So it was a fun challenge to think outside of my own mental box to create something new. Now, before I let y'all go, I do want to show you a couple more quilting plans for Star Island. These are also pretty custom. And I'm going to start by showing you a closer view of what's going on behind me here. So this is a panel, another big giant asterisk. If you have pieced your Star Island and you're wanting to try something new and you're scared, you're worried about messing up your gorgeous quilt, there are two things that I suggest. One option is to piece an extra block or two that can turn into throw pillows, right? This is a great block to, then put a little envelope backing on it and have a practice piece. The other option is to get one of these panels from me that it's 4 Star Island blocks printed, and then you can quilt it just like it's pieced to practice your quilting plan, okay? So I'm trying to hold this so y'all can both see. There we go. I think I achieved it. So what's going on with this quilting plan is you can see these big clamshells that are going across, right? Big clamshell, big clamshell, big clamshell. And then inside of those clamshells, I put some kind of palm frond lines because back in this OG Star Island, there's actually a little palm frond print in this white fabric that there's no hope of me showing you on screen. You're going to have to just trust me. But I took that shape and made it the quilting plan, okay? And then inside those palm fronds, I put different free motion quilting motifs. So every other one has switchbacks, ruler guided switchbacks. And then the alternating ones have things like paisleys and feathers and swirls and pebbles that just create a ton of texture on this quilt, okay? This is a really fun one. And this is one, I did this on the long arm when we were filming long arm prep. But if you're quilting on your domestic, this is a fun practice opportunity because you could take a big dinner plate or something like that and trace all your circles and palm fronds and things, and you could walking foot quilt all of that. So if you're a little nervous on the ruler work, you're kind of new at this thing, you could walking foot quilt all of that and really secure your quilting down or your quilt down. And then you could go back with your free motion quilting foot and add all kinds of different motifs and jazz it up and have it be a fun exercise in practicing all your different free motion quilting. So those of you who are maybe graduating from FMQA, this could be a fun practice if you still have this panel from your kit, okay? The other quilting plan, let me figure out where I'm going to toss this so it's out of my way. And then I have to figure out how to show you this. I'm going to do an embarrassing thing, okay? So this, I'm like, how do I even begin to do this? This Star Island was pieced as part of a Star Island quilt along way back in 2019. So like 1 million years ago, right? The pre-COVID times. And where we were at the time, I like put a firm rule on myself that the backing for this quilt had to come from my stash. Totally fine. Except that the only piece of fabric I had big enough in my stash was a weird burgundy solid that in no way matches the quilt. And every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, Holly Ann, that was a choice. And then over time, oh, and it's not even all burgundy. That's right. Some of it is blue. And then over time, it's gotten fuzzy and all kinds of things. So it's not a cute back. And I'm going to show it to y'all anyway. So I'll start by showing you the front as best I can. I don't expect that you'll be able to see a ton of it. So my feelings aren't hurt if you can't see super well. But what I've done here is I've done dot to dot quilting, going from the points down into the center, because I really wanted the stars to stand out on this, right? So one way to make things stand out when you're quilting them is to quilt them less or do something really simple on them, right? So that's the same logic behind if I was doing those little loops in mine and I used like Grello thread so it would blend with the fabric that I'm using, because I want those shapes to visually pop out. I don't want to interrupt the shapes too much. So these long X's basically that cut through the center, and then I've stitched in the ditch around my star for emphasis, okay? Then in the background where this white is, it's all pebbles. And am I doing anything in the, I think I'm also just stitching in the ditch around these lanterns. So again, wanting the lanterns to stand out. And then I'm putting these big old feathers in my stashing because I had to be extra somewhere. So on the back, where you can actually see it, it looks like this, okay? So you can see the block and how I've done that dot to dot quilting going through to emphasize the center of the star. I have left my lantern shapes unquilted. I have pebbles galore in the background. This is the quilt of perpetual demoing, because this quilt has been in process, like I said, since 2019, because it's the one I reach for when I need to demonstrate feathers. And then I'm ever so slowly filling in feathers in those sashings. All right, so 2 really intense motifs, 2 simpler motifs. And when it's done, it's going to look so cool. It's just taking me 1 million years to get it done, right? Excellent. All right, y'all. So there are my thoughts on what quilting plans are, why they matter, and a whole bunch of different ideas for how you could approach your Star Island. So hopefully this gives you an idea of where you can start depending on how much time and effort you want to put into this, what you're going to be doing with your Star Island quilt after it's quilted, right? Maybe what skills you're wanting to practice or grow. Or if you're working on this and you're hoping to jump into Free Motion Quilting Academy or Ruler Quilting Academy at the end of the month, something you may be aspiring to, that maybe you're going to finish piecing this and then work on those quilting skills and circle back around. Hopefully this has been inspiring and helpful. Do please head to stringandstory.com in order to get registered for that custom quilting masterclass next week to see these principles in action. And wherever you're watching, don't forget to like or follow and subscribe. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a wonderful rest of your night.